Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Father Andrew Mattingly. I am a Catholic priest in Kansas City, Missouri, and this is a podcast where I post homilies and random other stuff that I might teach or speak about. Hope you find something useful and maybe even inspiring. God bless you.
Good morning, Father.
Morning, Joe.
To take a few steps back, as of course you recall, a couple years ago, we started the vision casting process. We completed one of our goals last fall with the neighborhood gatherings, in which we invited every parishioner to attend their local neighborhood event. We had a great group of volunteers who organized it. But over the last few months, we've been trying to discern, okay, so we had that one initial gathering. What do we do next? And last week, you and I were both at kind of a town hall meeting amongst the individuals that were coordinating last fall's events. And you gave a great talk trying to explain some of the philosophy, but also some of the practicals behind what you intend for the parish moving forward. So this will be a great opportunity for you to share that same vision with the parish at large. So looking forward to hearing it for myself for the second time, but for most everyone else for the first.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this topic as well, Joe. Community, what is real Christian, real Catholic community? What are some of the essential components of it? I will say, maybe since we're getting new parishioners all the time and there's some non-parishioner listeners, to give people maybe an idea of the scope of this little goal that we accomplished last fall. The original intention was just so that parishioners could become aware of the parishioners that lived closest to them, because a lot of people weren't aware. Like, oh, I didn't know there were 8 people that lived within, 3 or 5 minutes of me, right? So we divided up the parish last fall into 43 different neighborhoods, if you will, or regions, and asked a parishioner, 2 parishioners actually in each region, so like 86 people, to kind of host just a gathering so that people would have a chance to meet each other. And obviously not all 500 adults in the parish were able to attend these, but it was probably about half, I would say, ended up going to these initial gatherings. And so then our team of parishioners that had kind of done the vision casting and so on, we've been, as you said, discerning the last few months. What do we do now? Do we keep these neighborhood groups going? Do we just let people do whatever they want? How much structure, how little structure? What's the sweet spot here? And like you said, last week we invited back these 86 hosts to quote-unquote town hall, and I gave a very sort of academic PowerPoint presentation about what is real Christian community. And so, we can walk through some of those ideas this morning. I will say a lot of the stuff that I went through is gleaned from a book that I've been reading the past few months, which I would highly recommend if there's any listeners that are like nerd out about, community. It's a common topic in Catholic circles. Like, we want to build community. We want to be a part of a great community. Like, when you sit down to try and sort of describe what people mean by that, it's like grabbing a slippery fish or something, like, what is it?
I think one of the great themes of this podcast is Joe and Father sit down and describe very obvious things that aren't also very obvious. What is a parish? What is community?
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what we're going to talk about next time.
Yeah.
More obvious things.
Exactly. So anyhow, but if listeners are interested in this book, it's an author who's fairly well known, Father Thomas Dubay, who died, I think, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. He was a priest that from probably the 70s through his death really wrote dozens of books, most of them about like the spiritual life. One of the titles he's most known for is The Fire Within, which is sort of an expose of the different stages of the spiritual life, particularly through the lens of St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, so it's two of the great doctors of the church when it comes to like the spiritual life. But he wrote a book that I hadn't heard of before. I don't even remember where I ran across it, in the early 70s, called Caring, a Biblical Theology of Community. So it's a short little book. Looks like maybe it was his doctoral thesis that he turned into a book or something, but really, really insightful. I've gleaned a lot from it. And so, yeah, that's where I'm going to sort of draw some of these concepts. So before we get into more of the particulars, we'll maybe end this podcast with some specifics about where we're moving in the future with these neighborhood groups at the parish. But to start, we kind of zoom 200,000 feet up and look at the larger, like you said, the obvious question: what is community?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good plan. I also think, and maybe I shouldn't say that we didn't plan this, but we didn't quite plan that we would talk about community after what is a parish. But it is helpful that kind of the main takeaway from what is a parish is that it's primarily a relationship, a communion between the faithful. So maybe a helpful follow-up for you to go a bit more in depth about what exactly that community is that you're gonna talk about.
Exactly. Yeah, it definitely builds on our last episode. A parish as a communion, a set of relationships. If you want to use the word community for communion, you can, right? And so yeah. So now we're gonna dive deeper into what are some other aspects of how that should look, right? So I'm going to use the analogy of a tree, which is helpful. Community should be something sort of that feels organic and alive. So we'll use a tree, and I'm just going to go into kind of four essential components of Christian community. And they're going to correspond to the roots of the tree, the trunk, the branches, and the fruit. So we'll start with the roots. And this is drawn directly from, I'm not claiming to have invented this myself or something. This is directly from the book that I referenced earlier. But the roots of a community would be what Father Thomas Dubay calls shared vision. Shared vision. So what he means by that is that the different people in a community sort of see the world in its fundamentals in the same way. So there wouldn't be vast divergences in a community of viewpoints on the world. And Christianity, Catholicism is obviously unique in this sense. And any religious creed really sort of offers a worldview. Like a lot of people mistakenly think about religion as just like about a moral structure, but that is secondary. The moral structure of a particular religion, whatever it is, flows from how it sees the world. Who is God? Who is the human person? What is the meaning of life, etc. Like morality flows from that, and so that's even more prior in a religious community. And so, yeah, so this shared vision is that we have common beliefs, basically. Like we share a common faith. We believe that God is a Trinity. We believe the human person is a composite of body and soul. We believe Jesus instituted certain sacraments that are meant, for our salvation. To give an idea of how important shared vision is for like depth of relationships and depth of community, we could take, an example where you have four men that are in a room trying to like build community with each other, build relationships, but they have four wildly different views of the world. So you'll have the existentialists. So this would be like a lot of philosophers in the early 20th century would fall in this category where they basically, their answer to the question, what is the meaning of life, is that there is no meaning. Like life is pointless. It's absurd is a word that they would sometimes use. It's void of every sense of meaning. And then the guy next to him is either a Buddhist or a Stoic. We can kind of go either way. But in Buddhism, the meaning of life is to sort of escape reality, right? To draw oneself, to attain this kind of like high level of abstraction where you sort of are aloof, in a sense, from reality. It's very similar, actually, to a philosophy that was popular in ancient Greece and Rome called Stoicism, where the goal was to almost become impervious to the events of life. That, like, if some tragic event happened, the Stoic is not supposed to cry, you know? So this is one view of the meaning of life that, like, or how to go about life, that I need to sort of escape reality, in a sense, or become indifferent to reality. So that's the second guy in the room.
This sounds like a joke, like
I know, yeah.
Four philosophers walk into a bar.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
Yeah. The third guy is a hedonist. So for him, the meaning of life is to maximize as much pleasure as possible. And so we can say that the hedonist, in an interesting sense, is trying to enter into reality more than the first two, but in a superficial way, right? And then you have the fourth guy in the room who's a Christian, a Catholic, who believes that the meaning of life is deep interpersonal communion with God and others, and that begins in sort of seed form here on earth, and it flowers to its full perfection in heaven, this unbelievably satisfying, abiding relationship, communion with God and everyone else in heaven. And so these four guys are sitting in a room, and the fact that they all view the world so differently is going to limit, just de facto, the depth of relationships that they're able to have with each other, right? For example, the existentialist, you know, is probably not going to, and this gets into the second part of the tree, actually. He's probably not going to have a great deal of concern for the other guys in the room, at least not based on his worldview, because he thinks everything is meaningless. So what's the point in, like, caring for my brother or even bothering to build a relationship in the first place, right? If life is pointless. For the Buddhist Stoic, they're probably not going to be super inclined, based on their worldview, to build deep relationships or community, because the goal is to kind of get out of that, to sort of escape reality. For the hedonist, he's interested in relationships, but only so long as they give him, you know, pleasure and enjoyment. The Christian, however, if his worldview is the only one here that actually thinks the fullness of human life, the full meaning of life, is communion with God and others, is relationship, he's going to be automatically way more interested in building relationship. Now, the interesting thing is that we would say that because every human being is made for relationship, that even if the first three guys falsely believe that that's not the meaning of life, there's still going to be like an ache in their heart for that, even if they sort of deny it.
Yeah.
Right. It's inescapable.
I've even, read in political philosophy that most people don't understand that humans by nature are communal persons, that's part of our likeness and image of God, is that we, like God, are made for relationship. And that's really fundamental, because a lot of modern political philosophies assume that we're primarily individuals first. And then you have to ask, well, how do those individuals interact in a world with other individuals? When in reality, it's, no, we're actually a community first. And then how do you see yourself as an individual within? So I think, super fundamental. A lot of effects are drawn from that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, even though these four guys in the room are all made for relationship in their deepest level of being, the fact that three of them don't believe that that's like as important as the Christian means that naturally, like, again, their depth of friendship is going to be limited, right? It doesn't mean obviously that like in our, a Catholic just in their daily life shouldn't try and still cultivate friendships with people of very divergent visions of reality. Like we do need to do that in an effort to hopefully introduce them to Jesus and the truth about what they're made for. But it just means that you're automatically at a disadvantage for depth of relationship when you don't have that shared vision. So a couple of quotes here from the New Testament, because if you read the New Testament carefully, especially Paul, he's very concerned that the early Christian communities had shared vision of reality, a common mind about things. So in 1 Corinthians 1:10, he says, I appeal to you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you be united in the same mind. And then in Philippians, he says, complete my joy by being of the same mind, being in full accord and of one mind, right? So very concerned in the early church about this unity of mind. Now, if we were to ask the question, okay, is this broader than just Christians in a community agree on the meaning of life, that it's interpersonal communion with God and others, or are there other things? And we would say, yeah, basically the unity of mind within a Christian community should apply to everything that the church has like solemnly taught in her magisterium, right? So if the church has solemnly taught that Jesus instituted 7 sacraments, then obviously we're going to be united in that belief. If the church has solemnly defined that, this is the story of humanity. God created us for relationship with him. There was this thing called original sin. Jesus came to restore it. And, now we can enter into that restoration through faith in the sacraments. Like the story of humanity is another sort of element of our shared vision, right? That the church is, as we read in the New Testament, the pillar and bulwark of the truth, right? This is another. So all these things, anything that the church has solemnly defined is going to be a part of this shared vision. So it's really a sort of complete and beautiful, and obviously we believe true, vision of reality and what life is all about. So things that are not solemnly defined by the church, what we might call non-fundamentals, this is a bit of a tangent, but it's important. In a community, so like a parish, parishioners need to be united and of the same mind on the fundamentals, the things the church has defined. On the non-fundamentals, the things that are open to differences of opinion or different preferences, it's very important in a community that people, especially the leader of the community, don't start taking non-essentials and treating them as if they're essential. Because otherwise it can create kind of a suffocating atmosphere within a community. So for example, with a particular spirituality, one parishioner might be into spirituality of Saint Benedict, right? Benedictine spirituality, ora et labora, prayer and work, praying the liturgy of the hours, right? Lectio Divina. The parishioner next to them might be more into Carmelite spirituality, sort of the great mystics of the 16th century and sort of mental prayer and so on and so forth. Another parishioner might be into the spirituality of Opus Dei, founded by Jose Maria and so on and so forth. It would be a mistake if like the pastor of a parish tried to impose a uniform spirituality on every single parishioner, or if one parishioner in their zeal for the spirituality that they're most drawn to try to impose that on all their friends. like I've gotten a lot of fruit from Benedictine spirituality, so you have to as well, There has to be a healthy diversity within a community, like a respect for people's freedom when it comes to things that are matters of opinion or preference.
And does that just stay in the spiritual realm of like spiritualities, or does that also flow into other things like lifestyle and more non-spiritual components of life too, that we have a lot of?
Absolutely. Yeah. Literally anything that's not solemnly defined by the church.
So those are the 2 categories.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'll give a couple other examples. One, would be like apostolate. Every Catholic at baptism is given different charisms, which are graces that we have for the sake of others. So special gifts that we need to exercise for others. And usually those are going to come to play into what apostolates we are most drawn to and that are going to bear the most fruit. So one parishioner might be into works of mercy. Another parishioner might be more into, pro-life work or prison ministry or whatever. But there should be respect for people's freedom to kind of discern their own personal apostolates. I shouldn't go to the 5 parishioners next to me and say, because I do this apostolate, you should too, like that's something that's open. And even opinions about various societal structures, let's say. A big one might be like, I don't know, maybe not a big one, but like healthcare, right? The church leaves this sort of wide, like there's no doctrinal statement in the church that says the only acceptable, like, I don't know, approach to medicine and healthcare in a society is fill in the blank. So within a parish, you might have one Catholic that is like in favor of universal healthcare and another Catholic who's not in favor of that. And they both can be faithful Catholics, and they both should respect each other's freedom to hold those different opinions on matters that are not like solemnly defined by the church.
Great. And the point here is that there's a balance, or there's a fine line, because if you're in a community that tends to have a great shared vision on the non-negotiables, it's probably more difficult to also have more leeway on the ones that are. And so I think, so we have to we want shared vision, but have to kind of tread lightly to make sure that it doesn't overflow too far. Yeah,
exactly. And it's something we always have to be checking ourselves on. Like, is this an essential? Like, is this a dogma, doctrine that we do need to be united on? Like, it would be a problem in a parish if the parishioner next to me doesn't believe that the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, right? We're going to be at an impasse there. Like, that's not just a problem for the community, that's a problem for them personally, because that's something that's an unchangeable doctrine of the church. Yeah. But if we have different points of view on healthcare, so be it.
Sure. And here at Good Counsel, I would say, at least in large part, we have like the great benefit of having like quite a solid shared vision in terms of those things.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're in a unique position where, sadly, in many parishes, there isn't a full shared vision of people in the pews on the fundamentals. I've been in contexts like that before, and those the depth of community in those parishes is going to be severely hampered by the fact that there's not unity of mind on the faith, on the fundamentals. So this is the starting point. The trunk, to kind of move on here, is what we'll call mutual care and concern. So within a Christian community, the individual members should obviously care about each other, their spiritual and material welfare. So to go back to the 4 guys in the room, and we kind of already went through this, but the existentialists would say, why should I care about these other 3 guys? Life is pointless. The Buddhist Stoic would say, because he's trying to escape reality, he's probably not going to be like super interested in like care.
Getting more tangled up.
Yeah, getting more tangled up in people's lives, exactly. The hedonist, again, he's only going to care about you so long as he enjoys your company.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point that at least, I think the hedonist is at least a lot closer, maybe is in like the wrong form or going in like the wrong direction, but at least they're moving.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, is the Stoic closer or the hedonist? Because the Stoic is at least trying to like control and master his passions, but in this kind of cold, dead way.
Interesting.
The hedonist is all about like using the passions, but for the wrong things. But he is at least pointed towards like the real. And So it's sort of like a toss-up,
Yeah.
which one is... They both have something right and something dead wrong. So, but yeah. But really, it's just the Christian's going to be the only one that is like really, really oriented towards caring for the good of the others. In fact, it's always helpful for us to remember, in the early church, one of the things that the pagans found most striking about Christians was that they cared about each other. And to us, this sounds obvious, but that's only because we're, 1,800 years later, where like most people, like in the U.S. today, even who are like atheist or agnostic or something, have no idea how much their worldview is still actually a Christian worldview. That prior to the coming of Christianity, where you cared about your neighbor, like that was just sort of this part of the the whole new covenant, that wasn't present in pagan culture in the same way. And so they were shocked when they watched these Christians sort of like exercise this deep concern for each other. The famous quote from Tertullian in the early 3rd century, "See how they love one another." And it was literally that convinced a lot of pagans to become Christian, right? And so if we were to ask the question, what is care? What is care and concern? I think Father Dubay gives a great quote on this, a great answer. So I'll just read it here. He says, "To care is to jump into the other's skin." To care is to jump into the other's skin. If the sky in my life remains perfectly blue while my brother suffers depression, pain, anxiety, I may well question whether I am living in his skin, whether I am concerned with his interests rather than my own. I may indeed question my love. If, on the other hand, despite my own troubles, I thoroughly thrill in the accomplishment of my sister or brother, I can be confident that I am concerned. Jumping into the other's skin.
It's great.
Right? I feel like super challenged by that because like I'm nowhere near that sort of vision of what it means to be concerned, like just on Tuesday, office hours here, and a bunch of parishioners came in to talk about everything under the sun, all these sorts of things going on in their life, the good, the bad, the challenging, and the challenges that they're facing, like I have to admit, like I am concerned about those, but not to the same degree that he's describing here.
Yeah.
Like there's a certain maybe lack of entering into, compassion, I guess, entering into another's suffering where you really sort of feel it with them, that I kind of notice in my own life. So I know this is sort of, care sounds like a lame word, but like the bar of what we're describing by is actually pretty high.
Yeah, I think the image that pops into my mind is that of a mother who, when a child has a struggle, like it's maybe even more so theirs. Like it keeps them up at night more so than the child. When they're in pain, like the mother's pain is even more sharp. Like, and again, if that's the care that we're talking about, yeah, that's pretty intense.
Yeah, I give you another quote here from Father Dubay on this. He says, "Civility is not enough. Politeness is not enough. Cordiality is not enough. Nor is chatting, nor is sharing activities. Community happens when brothers and sisters are concerned about the interests of the others." And this line is great. He says, "We may not enjoy everyone in the brotherhood, but we must care. Otherwise, we have juxtaposition, not evangelical fraternity." I feel like that's so important. We may not enjoy everyone in the brotherhood, but we must care. I think that one of the reasons that's so important is in our society today, we sort of, there's multiple, there's 20 options for every component of our life. I have 20 choices of cereal. I have 20 choices of houses. I have 20 choices of cars. I have 20 choices of this, of that, of parishes even. Like I have 20 choices for all these things. And I think it's hard for us to shift into a mindset, to not into that consumeristic mindset too, in terms of our relationships. Like, I'm the one who picks, who determines the people I spend time with. And if we only look at relationships in that way, I think there's a danger that it's kind of can trend in the hedonist direction. Like, I'm only ever going to spend time with people whose company I enjoy.
Yeah, this reminds me of Aristotle talks about 3 different kinds of friendship, and he names them more or less the pleasure friendship, the utility friendship, and the virtue friendship. And I think when you hear that, you think to yourself, oh yeah, like I primarily opt for the virtue friendship. But it's actually, I think, more difficult than you think, because most people naturally are going to spend time with the people who they enjoy spending around, have common interests, they're able to be helpful. Like, those are all like good things. But I do agree, they kind of side with the hedonistic outlook, because it's only the people that you get the enjoyment from. And at any point in time when that pleasure or utility drops, then the friendship drops and you move on to whoever else is now enjoyable and useful. So yeah, I think it's maybe more common than we think. Even just reflecting on it myself, I'm like, yeah, that's
I think that's good. And I would almost I think you bring up a good point. I would almost here draw a distinction between friendship and just caring for someone who maybe I'm not friends with, but is like still in my sort of community, who's still in my sphere of responsibility almost.
Yeah.
Because I do think, like, here in the parish, for example, I think there's a lot of people that their friendships with others in the parish, for example, started out because they enjoy each other's company, right? It's just how friendship starts. But then over time, it has turned into a virtuous friendship where they're both pursuing virtue together. So it's kind of reached this highest level of friendship. But I think the real danger is just spending time with friends, I guess, is maybe a way to put it, and not making time for, or not even noticing or seeing the people in my community who I do need to still care about, but who maybe, because we have different temperaments, different, I don't know, personalities, just so many things are different that it's going to make a friendship per se kind of difficult, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the age-old distinction between friends and family. Like the kind of what people say is you don't have to like your family, but you have to like love them, or something like that, because your family is likely going to be made up of people who you don't have, the same interests, or maybe you don't always enjoy their company, but like there's this sense of like responsibility and obligation in a positive sense. Like, you have to cultivate that relationship. It's like, it's part of your responsibility. They're in your sphere. A coworker, neighbor, family is kind of the most extreme. But yeah, I think that's like the age-old comparison. Like, you get to choose your friends, you don't get to choose your family. And that's kind of, I think, at least in my mind, the kind of care that you're trying to articulate here.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I feel like these conversations about parish life and things, it always comes back to that analogy, like a parish is a family. And like, the more we think about that, the more accurate understanding we're going to have of like what a parish is meant to be. So I think that's great. Spot on. Yeah. So that's sort of the mutual care and concern component. And this is one of the things that we hope happens with these neighborhood groups, which we'll talk more about at the end of the podcast. But just that in getting to know the 10 or 20, households that you live closest to, there's going to be people who you may not enjoy their company that much, right? As Father Dubay says, but we still have to care about them. So getting to know them, getting to know their needs, and, thinking of ways that I could be of support to this person. So I think shifting from looking at a parish community just as bonds of friendship to expand beyond that to family bonds too, as you put it, is, I think, profoundly important to get to this mutual caring concern.
Great.
And I would say too, maybe a hallmark, like a community would know that it's starting to really get this right when it's exercising special care for the weakest members of the community. So those who are lonely, who are sort of, I don't know, on the fringe in some way, shape, or form of the community. Maybe it's obvious that it's difficult for them to make friendships for whatever reason. They're awkward or something, or who knows. But when a community notices those people quickly and takes care of them and shows them concern, that I think is a sign of like a healthy community that's really hitting this care and concern.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe one more to add that you mentioned to me before is, it's also not like these communities are not supposed to be enjoyable. Like they should be, and we hope and presume that they will be. But at least that's not the initial aim. Like we're not starting there. But again, the idea is, you're spending time with your family that you're obligated to, and it's also fun. Like, we hope that it's both.
Yeah. It's funny. I'll share this story. This isn't quite connected, but it's just kind of funny. I knew a guy in seminary who had been in the Peace Corps for a few years in some country in Africa, and he was kind of going through a reversion at the time, and he went into the cathedral of this African diocese where he was, this big city, to pray one day, kind of in the middle of the day, and there's nobody in there. A big church. And so he's there praying, and this other guy comes into the church, and this vast cathedral with all these empty spaces, and he sits right next to him. Like, well, what a difference in culture for one.
Wow.
But just that's kind of a good image maybe of like, he comes in to this Catholic church, sees a guy praying, automatically knows we're bonded on the level of shared vision. Like we have this in common, and you're my family. Like I've never met you before. I've never talked to you, but I'm gonna come sit by you because we're part of the same family.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Such a great story. Now, if you tried that here, of course, people would be weirded out. Like, what are you doing, you weirdo? Like, give me my personal space. There's 37 other pews you can sit in.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you're walking into the large family dining room table, and just one person is sitting there, you're probably not going to sit on the other end.
Yeah.
You're probably going to sit right next to him.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so we can jump into the branches now, which these last two components, we won't go through quite as much material. The branches would be what we'll call communal activities. So if we ask the question, what sort of activities should characterize a Christian community? I'd say probably the best place to look is the famous Acts 2:42, which describes these sort of four fundamental activities of the early Christian community. So Acts 2:42 says, and it's referring to the early disciples here, they held steadfastly to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to the prayers. Right, so four things. The breaking of bread here refers to the Eucharist, the Mass. So that's number one. And in a sense, you could almost say that, not almost, you can say that the Mass is really like the soil, actually, under the tree, because Christian community like flows out from the Eucharist. This is why we talked in the parish episode about how the number one component for what it means to be a parishioner is attendance at Sunday Mass. That is the thing from which, like, it's the union with Jesus there, that sort of flows into the horizontal union with like the parishioners that I'm worshiping with. So in some sense, this is like a branch, like the number one communal activity, but in some sense, it's also like the soil that the tree sits on. And then the other ones, prayer, obviously people in a Christian community should pray together. And I would say that should happen outside of Mass as well. And I think, like here at Good Counsel, there's a lot, it's every family I know tries to pray on their own and to pray with their family, some sort of family prayer, even if it's very simple. The one thing I think that doesn't happen as often is multiple households or parishioners getting together to pray with each other. I think that's a bit more rare. But that would be something that maybe we can sort of work on and try to grow in as a parish, and something that would be a hallmark of a Christian community, a Catholic community, that when we get together, and I do see this happening, I'm not saying it's non-existent by any means, but when parishioners get together with other parishioners, that it should be top of mind. Is there a space here where we could pray together, even if just very briefly and simply, So that's the prayer, the fellowship. I would say, when believers come together, when parishioners come together to hang out for fellowship, in my mind, the main goal is increased sort of knowledge of each other, because the more we know someone, the more we can love them, because there's more of them to love, so to speak. It's sort of like they've revealed more of themselves, so now I have a bigger target to aim at with my love. And so we want our hanging out with each other to be conducive to an increased knowledge of the other person. And this does happen just naturally. Like you have a 30-minute conversation with a fellow parishioner, you're going to know more about them by the end of it. That being said, I do think there are some small ways where this could be prompted a bit more specifically. And so like in these neighborhood gatherings, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but these neighborhood gatherings that we're going to roll out this summer, there's always going to be at a gathering some kind of like intentional fellowship, some sort of question that people kind of go around and answer. It can be very simple. How'd you end up at Good Counsel? Who's your favorite saint?
Are you a convert?
Yeah, are you a convert? Like a happy memory from your childhood. I don't know. Just something to kind of take this mutual knowledge of each other like 5% deeper than you might get in just a casual conversation.
I see.
So we have Mass on Sundays, right? Communal prayer, fellowship, and then the Apostles' teaching. I'll talk a little bit more later about how we're going to incorporate that into neighborhood gatherings, but studying the doctrine of the faith. And then lastly, just real fast, the fruit of the tree in a community would be what I'll call shared apostolate. So when a Christian community is like really flourishing, then there are going to be members of the community that kind of join together to accomplish certain apostolic goals. So a couple friends might get together to go visit a nursing home and find the loneliest people there and just, ministry of presence kind of thing, just get to know them and so on. You could have several parishioners that band together to start some sort of pro-life apostolate. You could have a massive communal apostolate, which we're actually kind of in the middle of right now to some degree, of like starting a school, parishioners banding together to, build this or that. I know some parishioners in another parish who are trying to start a home right now for single mothers that, are at risk of like homelessness. And so shared apostolate should be like sort of the ultimate, like when when a Christian community is firing on all cylinders, it's focused outwards, not just inwards.
Yeah. Can you maybe say a bit more about that? Because I've heard that before. I think a lot of people maybe just naturally would maybe presume, or it just happens that the fruit is just kind of the shared common life, like the internal, maybe back to pleasure and utility and virtue loving of that particular group in itself. What's the distinction, or what's the reason why that is insufficient, and why the fruit is outside, why the fruit is external?
Yeah. Well, I think eventually, there might be like this grace period where like a parish, let's say, it kind of gets all the way up to like the branches, and the shared vision is, they're crushing it, and the mutual care and concern is like deep, and the shared, these four common activities are like frequent and habitual. But if they stop there and they don't begin turning their attention outwards to the starving world that doesn't know Jesus, eventually that community is going to like collapse in on itself. It's going to wither. And this is just because this is how Jesus has designed Christian community, like the Great Commission, go out and proclaim the gospel to every creature, right? Baptizing and teaching them what I've told you. So it's just kind of how he's designed it. There's this famous quote that a lot of people will use, right, from Paul VI in the 70s from this document on evangelization. He says the church exists to evangelize, right? And so if we don't do that, we're just going to sort of suffocate ourselves. So there might be a grace period.
Yeah.
We get to the branches and everybody's like, wow, this is amazing. But then it turns into the jacuzzi effect, as it's sometimes called, if you don't turn outwards.
Okay.
So
that's helpful.
Great. Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about how we want to structure these neighborhood groups at Good Counsel.
What's the plan?
The plan. So, so the plan is that starting this summer, that I need to redraw the map. So I'm going to redraw some boundaries of groups, but every group will have anywhere from, let's say, 10 adults to like 20 or 25 adults, maybe on the high end. Every group's going to be a little bit different, varying number of kids. But we're calling these neighborhood groups, and they'll be scattered around the city where parishioners live. And we're going to ask every group to meet at minimum 3 times a year. So there's going to be a captain for each group that's just kind of in charge of scheduling these 3 gatherings per year. And then every 5 or 6 of these neighborhood groups are going to themselves be grouped together in what we'll call a region. So there'll be 8 or 10 regions around the city. And once a year, we're going to ask the region to get together, probably at like in the warmer months at a park or something, since it'll be probably too many people for most to host in their house. And so that's kind of the minimum. We are holding out to the captains and their groups to consider once a month as kind of like maybe an ideal to shoot for. But the 3 neighborhood gatherings and 1 regional gathering a year, so once a quarter, is kind of the structured like time goal or frequency goal. Obviously, there's not going to be any like, I don't know, sign on the dotted line requirement
contract.
For parishioners to attend these. My hope as pastor is that every parishioner has some desire to attend these, like sees the importance of not just being at a parish to receive, but also being at a parish to give, right? There was this great moment actually at the town hall last week where, a couple people were mentioning, is this too many times a year even? Because, 4 times a year doesn't sound like a lot, but when you have a large family, let's say, and they're just like everyone's involved in like a million things, and they're all good things. It's sort of like, gosh, how do we?
This is just one more
thing. Like, but it was interesting. One of the younger moms who was there kind of commented, and she said, "But yeah, like, you know, me and my husband are just sort of starting out, first 5 years of marriage, and we have a couple little kids, and maybe the older moms feel like there's not enough time to invest in another like quarterly thing." But she made this really interesting point. She said, but I need their involvement in my life. Like as a younger parent, I need the wisdom, the advice,
the example, I was going to say.
Yeah, the example, the experience of a mom who's 15 or 20 years into marriage. And so I thought she was just making a really good point that, like, again, these neighborhood groups, we want to primarily look at it not from the perspective of I'm going to these because I'm going to benefit from it, like I'm going to receive, but I'm going to them because the Lord has blessed me with certain gifts, experiences, just the uniqueness of who I am that can bless others, right? Like the Lord wants to use me to care for, to give an example, to bless others in the group. So more approaching it from this perspective of giving, that I have something to give in this community. So that's kind of the bare minimum, quarterly, once a month is the ideal. And yeah, in terms of what will happen at these gatherings, basically Mass isn't going to happen. So if we go back to Acts 2:42, we're not going to I'm not going to be traveling around the city doing house masses. But they'll be bonded, by attending Sunday Mass together here at the parish. But the other three elements from Acts 2:42 will be present at each of these gatherings in just a simple way. So prayer, that's just going to be left up to every group. If they want to do a rosary, if they want to do a decade of the rosary, if they want to do a chaplet, if they want to do 10 minutes of Lectio Divina together, if they want to sing some like hymns or, praise and worship music together, like whatever they want to do for prayer, we will let them sort of, experiment with that. And but some sort of prayer. For fellowship, like I said, a lot of that's just going to be the casual conversation at the gatherings where people get to know each other. But there will be at least, 10, 15 minutes allotted where there'll be some sort of prompt question, like we mentioned, and everybody will have a chance to kind of go around and answer it if they want. Tell us an enjoyable memory from your childhood, or how'd you end up at the parish, or
a high or a low from the last week or
high or
month.
low from the last week or month, or so just something simple to take the fellowship component 5% deeper, and then the doctrinal component, the teaching of the apostles. So every month I'm going to prepare I'm going to select like a short article or a couple paragraphs from the catechism with maybe a comment or two or something, but there'll be some very short and sweet kind of doctrinal content that the captain will bring to the meeting in handouts and just pass them out, and the group will read this short section, and then there'll be 10 or 15 minutes for people to weigh in on, oh, I didn't know that, or oh, this makes sense because of XYZ, or I can relate this to my life in this way, or that's a really beautiful point I hadn't thought about, or just brief simple conversation about something substantive and meaty, right? Some doctrine of the faith. So that's kind of the plan of how these gatherings. Oh, there's always going to be food. That's important. That's people bond over food, right? So probably potluck style. But that's kind of a general overview of starting this summer, that these will be rolled out, not required, but my real hope is that parishioners will see the importance of this and really invest themselves in these groups.
If a captain, I believe as we're calling them, a neighborhood captain, has like a bit of a different, and after discussing with their group, has a bit of a different sense of how they want the quarterly or monthly meeting to go, how would you describe the amount of leeway that they do or do not have? Like, what's the balance of like, here's kind of some ideas and structures that I have. Like, I want it to have some shape or form, but these things are up to you. How would you kind of describe that?
Yeah, I would say almost maximum leeway, maybe like 90% leeway.
Okay.
The 10% that wouldn't be would be they can't say, we're not going to do any prayer, right? They can't leave out the doctrinal content.
Yeah.
Like I think we're following Scripture here in terms of the pillars of
You
like
can't say
Christian
superficial
community.
Conversation only.
Yeah.
Only chiefs and the weather.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I think as long as they do something for prayer, something for fellowship, and I'd have to think about whether I'd leave it up to them to choose their own, doctrinal content,
Yeah.
or whether I see value in like it being the same content that the whole parish is discussing,
Yeah. And even tied to you and the church. Like,
Yeah.
so it's not that there's a risk of anyone going off the rails, but it's just kind of
just provides a little extra security.
Yeah.
But I would say as long as they keep to those three things, I mean, they can kind of do what they want. We don't want to get into a mode of over controlling or micromanaging or And if a group gets together and they're like, we want to get together every Sunday night, great, but or if they say like from day one, even though there's no structured communal apostolate that's part of these groups, we already decided that we want to do X, Y, or Z thing. Like, great, do your thing.
One question that was asked last week that I thought was a good one was what's the amount of leeway in terms of who can be invited? Like, is it strictly parishioner only? What if there's someone who's a good friend and neighbor that maybe goes to a different parish? What if we want to use the meeting as a form of evangelization and bring a neighbor into? How would you maybe, again, without micromanaging, how would you maybe like set the tone for how a group should approach those kinds of questions?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. I'm still honestly kind of thinking through some of the consequences of that. So I'll start with inviting like non-Catholics or fallen away Catholics to these neighborhood gatherings. I think if a person in the group uses their common sense and their own discernment and they think to themselves, I have this non-Catholic neighbor who I think this would be a good next step for them to come and experience a simple gathering of believers where we pray together, we have some simple conversation, some food, they get to know a couple other Catholics besides me. I think I would entrust that judgment and discernment to the individual members of each group. Use your common sense. And if it makes sense, great. Invite your non-Catholic neighbor, your fallen away Catholic neighbor. When it comes to other practicing Catholics that are at other parishes, my lean right now is that I don't think it would be good to invite them to these gatherings, because we're not trying to steal people from other parishes, for one. Second of all, because the main point of these gatherings is mutual care and concern for the parish family, I think it can, like if you start to blur the lines of what the purpose is of these groups, then it sort of might end up just sort of washing away any definitive meaning to the groups. It'll just be like, because people can gather with whoever they want, whenever they want, in all these other formats. So if they have friends from other parishes, for example, that they want to hang out with, like hang out with them, do that. But I think since these groups have a very specific purpose, which is the deepening of bonds between people that worship together in the same place on Sundays, I'm leaning away from giving groups leeway to just invite other Catholic friends that they have who are practicing. And someone else also asked, could I invite, we're really good friends with maybe these new Good Counsel parishioners that are in a different neighborhood group. Could we invite them to our neighborhood group? And again, I think my lean right now is probably not. That would sort of, if everybody starts crisscrossing groups, then the whole geographical component is gone. And the reason for the geographical component is that I have a greater responsibility to care about the people that live closer to me, right? The closer I am to someone, in physical proximity, it means that it's going to be more of I have more of an obligation to loan my next door neighbor a ladder than someone who lives, an hour away, right? And so I'm leaning away from parishioners just being able to hop around to like whatever, like, I'm friends with 5 families in this other geographical group, so I'm just gonna go to their gatherings.
That's why you have to bring your license to these groups. You show your zip code.
That's right. Yeah, we're gonna start issuing parishioner ID cards. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. That's helpful. Just maybe a couple of practical things from my perspective. If you're listening to this and you're a parishioner and you want to be a neighborhood captain, what should they do? And probably the same if they both want to be the neighborhood captain and would raise their hand to be the regional captain. Which again, at the moment, the only additional responsibility is to schedule one more gathering with maybe 5 or 6 different neighborhoods. What should they do?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, if you want to be a captain, we're probably going to need somewhere around, since a couple of the groups are kind of combining and getting a little larger, because we found that some of the groups before were a little small. There's probably going to be around 30, maybe 35 groups at this point, so we'll need that many captains. And 8 of that group will be asked, or somewhere around 8, will be asked to be, like you said, a regional captain as well. So if any parishioners listening and they're really gung-ho about, I would love to kind of captain and just sort of schedule my neighborhood group, they can email Haley Shaver, who is our new faith formation director at the parish. She's actually split 50-50, basically. Half her time is doing that. Much of it's taken up with OCIA, which is complicated administrative beast. And then the other half is as my new personal assistant, so managing my calendar and things. But yeah, any parishioner can email Haley, and her email address is formation@olgckc.org. And just say, hey, I'd like to be a captain.
Great. I think not that we need to hash out the job description of a captain, but a 1-year commitment is the expectation. Mm-hmm. And after 1 year, someone else would be nominated to take up the...
Yeah, it'd basically be summer to summer, so following the school year. And the commitment is, the goal is that it's relatively simple. The main thing is just scheduling, the 3 neighborhood gatherings. If the group decides to do monthly, it would take a little more work, but maybe they could establish just a regular day per month in that case, and that takes away a lot of the scheduling difficulties. So they would just schedule the meetings, and then they would just make sure that the prayer fellowship and the doctrinal sharing happens. So ideally, they wouldn't be the ones leading those things, actually, that other people in the group would kind of step up and be like, yeah, I'll, organize the prayer or whatever. And another person says, I'll print out, each gathering, I'll print out the doctrinal thing and bring them. And so it's good for people in the group to kind of split up little responsibilities as much as possible. And that way the captain is it's just kind of, he just makes sure everything happens, but is not necessarily the one who like leads everything at the meetings. So
That's great. Any final thoughts before we conclude?
yeah, I would just say, I don't know. I would just come back to this line from Father Dubay, because I just think and again, I feel it, like this is really challenging for me. I like to hang out with people I enjoy, right? And
Me too.
you know,
I'll raise my hand.
it's
Who doesn't?
so to really enter into this idea of like family, like you said, it all comes back to that. Like the parish is a family. We have to care about each other. And so I'll just read his quote again. He says, "We may not enjoy everyone in the brotherhood, but we have to care. Otherwise, we have juxtaposition and not evangelical fraternity." So
That's great. Let's end with that. Thanks again for your time, Father. It's always good to chat.
great to chat with you, Joe.